They came from across the world, drawn by a promise. It was a promise forged in iron and steam, a vision of a new life in a vast country. Railroad companies printed posters and sent agents to distant lands. They spoke of good pay, steady work, and the chance to build a future. For many in Ireland, fleeing famine, or in China, seeking fortune, these words were a beacon of hope. They imagined solid ground beneath their feet and a clear path forward. The railroad was more than just a job. It was the American dream, laid out in parallel lines of steel stretching toward the horizon. The promise was simple and strong, like the engines that would one day run on these tracks. But the reality that greeted them was far different from the pictures on the posters. The work was not just hard. It was a relentless battle against nature and against time. The pay, once travel costs and company store debts were deducted, was often meager. The bright future they had imagined was quickly clouded by the dust of the plains and the cold shadows of the mountains. The companies that had promised so much saw these men not as builders of a nation, but as a resource to be used. They were numbers on a ledger, a line item in the enormous cost of spanning a continent. The dream was still there, somewhere out west, but getting to it required surviving the journey, one day at a time. The most jarring truth was the danger. It was a constant companion, silent and patient. Every swing of a pickaxe, every foot of track laid, carried a risk. The death rates were staggering, though few spoke of them openly. It was said that for every railroad tie laid across the land, a worker's life was lost. This might be an exaggeration, but it holds a deeper truth. The cost of progress was measured in more than just money and materials. It was measured in the lives of the thousands of men who came seeking a better life, but found an early grave instead. Their bodies and stories buried beneath the very tracks they helped to lay. The companies knew this from the start. They understood the risks involved in carving a path through an untamed wilderness. They knew that men would fall from trestles, be caught in rock slides, or succumb to the brutal elements. Yet this knowledge did not lead to better safety measures. Instead, it was simply factored into the budget. The loss of a worker was a predictable expense, an unfortunate but necessary part of the business. The steady supply of new immigrants meant that there was always someone ready to take the place of a fallen man, ensuring the work never stopped. The great iron horse would thunder across the country, but its path was paved with a quiet, human sacrifice. The Sierra Nevada mountains stood as a formidable barrier. They were a wall of solid granite, snow, and ice, separating the east from the west. To the railroad planners, they were simply an obstacle to be overcome. But for the workers, mostly Chinese immigrants, these mountains became a place of immense hardship and quiet terror. The air grew thin and cold as they climbed higher, and the winters were unforgiving. Snow fell not in inches, but in feet, burying the work camps and the tracks under a thick white blanket. The wind howled through the passes, a constant, mournful sound that seemed to whisper of the dangers that lay in wait. The cold was a relentless enemy. It seeped into their thin clothes and simple tents, chilling them to the bone. Frostbite was common, claiming fingers and toes, and turning a simple task into a painful ordeal. Workers had to dig tunnels through the snow, sometimes 40 or 50 feet deep, just to get from their sleeping quarters to the worksite. These snow tunnels became their world, a dim, enclosed space where they lived and labored for months on end. Avalanches were a constant threat, thundering down the mountainsides without warning, capable of burying an entire crew in a matter of seconds. The beautiful snow-covered peaks were, for them, a place of silent, frozen dread. The day for a railroad worker began long before the sun. It started with a stir in the darkness, the sound of men rising from hard bunks, or, just simple bedrolls on the ground. There was no gentle waking, only a shift from the cold of the night to the chill of the morning. In the camps, the air would be still and quiet, broken only by the crackle of a newly lit cook fire. The men would gather around its warmth, their faces lit by the low flames. They ate a simple breakfast, often the same thing every day: coffee, bread, and perhaps some salted meat. It was fuel for the body, eaten in silence, as they prepared for the long hours ahead. As the first light touched the sky, the foreman's calls would echo through the camp. It was time to work. The men would gather their tools, heavy hammers, sharp pickaxes, long iron bars. They walked from the camp to the end of the line, the place where the finished track met the untamed earth. This short walk was a daily journey from a temporary home to a place of hard labor. The landscape around them was vast and empty, whether it was the flat plains or the rising mountains. They were small figures in a huge world, their purpose for the day clear and simple, to move the railroad forward, even by just a few hundred feet. The work itself was a rhythm of repeated motions, the swing of a hammer driving a spike, the lift and drop of a pickaxe breaking the ground, the strain of a crew of men lifting a heavy steel rail into place. Each task was done over and over, from sunup to sundown. There was little conversation, only the sounds of labor, the clang of metal on metal, the thud of earth being moved, the grunts of exertion. The sun would climb high in the sky, beating down on them in the summer, or offering little warmth in the winter. The day was measured not in hours, but in the slow, steady progress of the track. When evening came, the work did not simply stop. It wound down slowly. The last spikes were driven, the tools were gathered and counted. The men walked back to the camp, their bodies tired and aching from the day's toil. The setting sun cast long shadows behind them. They were covered in the dust and grime of their labor. Back at the camp, they would eat their evening meal, another simple, filling affair. There was little energy for anything else. The day ended as it began, in the quiet weariness of men who had given all their strength to the railroad, knowing they would have to do it all again tomorrow. As dusk settled over the work camp, the air would fill with the smell of wood smoke and cooking food. The men, finished with their labor, would gather in small groups around the campfires. This was a time of brief respite. They would sit on crates or on the bare ground, eating their supper from tin plates. The meal was usually simple and hearty, designed to replenish the energy spent during the day. It might be a stew, beans, or salted pork, accompanied by hard biscuits and strong coffee. For a few moments, the relentless demands of the railroad faded into the background, replaced by the simple human need for food and warmth. Conversation around the fire was often quiet. The men were too tired for loud talk or celebration. They might speak in low tones, in English, or in the Gaelic and Chinese dialects of their homelands. They would talk about the work, about news from back home, or simply sit in a shared, weary silence. The firelight flickered on their faces, revealing the exhaustion etched there. For many, this was the only social time they had, a brief period of community in a life of isolation and hard work. It was a small island of calm in a sea of labor, a chance to feel like more than just a part of a machine. When the meal was over, there was little else to do but prepare for sleep. The camps were rudimentary, offering minimal comfort. In the summer, men might sleep in large tents or simply under the stars. In the brutal winters of the mountains, their shelters were little more than wooden shacks or dugouts carved into the snowbanks. They slept in their work clothes, on beds of straw or rough blankets. The cold was a constant presence, and sleep was often a shallow, fitful thing, interrupted by the chill or the sounds of the camp. They rested their tired bodies, knowing that the morning would bring the same hard labor all over again. Sleep was a necessity, but it was rarely peaceful. The dangers of the day did not disappear with the darkness. The threat of a sudden blizzard, a rockslide, or even just the sickness that spread easily in the crowded, unsanitary camps was always present. The men slept with the knowledge that their lives were fragile. They were far from home, in a wild and unforgiving land. The brief hours of rest were just an intermission in a long and dangerous performance. They closed their eyes, seeking a few hours of oblivion before the foreman's call would once again signal the start of another day on the line. The railroad companies were meticulous record keepers. They kept detailed ledgers of every expense, no matter how small. The cost of every rail, every spike, every shovel was carefully noted down. They tracked payrolls, supply shipments, and the number of miles completed each week. These books were a testament to the business of building a railroad, a precise accounting of the monumental effort. In these ledgers, the workers appeared as names next to numbers, representing the wages they were paid. They were part of the balance sheet, a cost to be managed. However, there was another, hidden set of records, or rather, a deliberate lack of them. When a worker died on the job, the official accounting was often stark and impersonal. A name might be removed from the payroll, with a simple notation like departed or contract terminated. There was rarely any mention of the cause of death. An accidental explosion, a fall from a trestle, a fatal illness. These tragedies were reduced to a simple bookkeeping entry. For the company, the man had ceased to be an expense. His story, his life, and the circumstances of his death were not considered relevant to the business of the railroad. This practice was especially true for the thousands of Chinese workers who labored on the Central Pacific Line. Their deaths were systematically undercounted and hidden. The company did not keep official records of their fatalities. When a Chinese worker was killed, his contract was simply paid out to his fellow workers or a headman, and his name vanished from all official documents. It was as if he had never been there at all. This was a calculated decision. Acknowledging the true death toll would have been bad for public relations and might have invited government scrutiny. It was easier and cheaper to simply erase them from the story. Because of this, the true human cost of the Transcontinental Railroad will never be known. Historians have tried to piece together the numbers, but the deliberate erasure makes it impossible. The company records, so precise about the cost of iron, are silent on the cost in lives. The names of the thousands who perished are lost to time, their memories buried with their bodies in unmarked graves along the tracks. The official history of the railroad, the one celebrated with golden spikes and grand speeches, was built upon this foundation of forgotten names and untold stories. The Book of the Dead remains unwritten. The last spike was driven in 1869 at Promontory Summit, Utah. It was a golden spike, a symbol of a great achievement. The nation was now connected, coast to coast. Telegraph wires sent the news across the country, and people celebrated the triumph of engineering and manifest destiny. The railroad was seen as a marvel of the modern age, a testament to American ingenuity and determination. The photographs from that day show the officials and the engines, the faces of progress. But the faces of the men who did the dirtiest, most dangerous work are conspicuously absent. The legacy of the railroad is written in steel across the American landscape. It opened the West, spurred economic growth, and unified a sprawling country. But there is another, quieter legacy that runs alongside the tracks. It is the legacy of the thousands of workers who gave their lives to build it. Their stories are not found in the official histories or the celebratory speeches. They exist as whispers in the mountain passes, as echoes in the long, empty stretches of the plains. It is said that there is a ghost for every tie, a silent witness to the cost of building the line. This ghostly presence is not a tale of haunting in the traditional sense. It is the haunting of memory, the quiet insistence that the full story be told. It is the knowledge that the smooth ride of the train is made possible by the broken bodies and forgotten names of the past. The Chinese workers who blasted through the granite, the Irish immigrants who laid the track under the prairie sun, they are the unseen foundation upon which this great structure rests. Their sacrifice was real, even if it was erased from the ledgers. The railroad connected a nation, but it did so at a ghostly and deeply human cost. Today, as a train glides effortlessly through the Sierra Nevada, it passes over the very ground where men were lowered in wicker baskets, where they froze in snow tunnels, and where they were buried by avalanches. The journey is smooth and comfortable, the dangers of the past hidden by time and progress. But if you listen closely, in the rhythmic click-clack of the wheels on the track, you can almost hear the faint, steady beat of a hammer on a spike. It is the enduring rhythm of the men who built the railroad, a quiet reminder of the price that was paid and the countless souls who were left behind on the long road to the future. Fade to black.